Okay, good evening students. We are discussing about hormonal control of reproduction in mammals, and we have discussed about the reproductive system of male and the hormone control. Now we are going to discuss hormonal control of reproduction in female. Okay, just a second, I am going to start it. Okay. So let me start with female reproductive system. Hormonal control of female reproductive system. So coming to the female reproductive system, it has the following parts. With respect to human beings, I am telling you. After that, we'll deal with the mammalian part. There is ovary, followed by oviduct, which is called as fallopian tube. Uterus, cervix, and female genital organ. In addition to this, there are accessory glands. And coming to the structure, the female reproductive system shows a pair of ovaries. They are present in the abdominal cavity. Unlike mammals, male, especially in human beings, where they are lodged in scrotal sacs, here they are present in abdomen. And now attached to this, there is a funnel-like structure with a mouth-like opening which has cilia-like structures. And this mouth-like opening is called as fimbriated ostium. It is called as ostium because it is made up of cilia-like structures. It is called as fimbriated ostium. This leads to infundibulum. Infundibulum. The infundibulum continues as the oviduct, which is also called as the fallopian tube. Okay. So this fallopian tube, or both the sides, unite to form a single uterus in case of human beings. The entry point of which is called as cervix, which leads out through the female genital organ and its opening. This is the structure of the female reproductive system. And coming to the uterus. Uterus is the place, let me tell you one by one. And coming to the ovary. Ovary is the place where ova are produced. So this is the place for oogenesis, formation of ova. After formation of ova takes place, the ovum that is formed here is released out. and this process is called as ovulation. Release of ovum is called as ovulation. After the ovum is released, by the motion of these cilia-like structures, the abdomen in which this entire system is present, having tissue fluid, the tissue fluid by the movement of this is drawn into the fallopian tube. Along with the tissue fluid, the ovum is also drawn and it comes to occupy a position in the fallopian tube. If copulation takes place and sperms are released into the female reproductive tract, they travel through this entire tract and reach the fallopian tube. Fallopian tube is the place where fertilization takes place. So fertilization takes place at the fallopian tube. After fertilization, zygote is formed. So this zygote undergoes development and it produces a small embryo. And the embryo passes from the fallopian tube and reaches the uterus. And this embryo soon gets in contact with the wall of the uterus. And the embryo is said to be very small and it is less weight. But our gestation period, embryonic development period, is 9 months, during which we may grow to 1.5 to 3 kgs. And we are also called as placental mammals. So as we are called as placental mammals, the food that is present in the egg, which is microlithal egg, is very less in content of yolk. So it is not sufficient for the entire period of development. So for the remaining period of development, there must develop a connection between the uterus and the developing baby called as fetus. And this connection is called as placenta. And for the placenta to be formed, it is formed by two tissues. One, the fetal placenta, the other is maternal placenta. So there is a connection between the maternal placenta and fetal placenta, and the maternal placenta is said to be provided by the wall of the uterus itself, in which the developing embryo gets implanted. This entire embryo gets implanted into the uterine wall where the development takes place. After the development is complete, here the fully developed baby comes, So the fully developed baby, which is in the wall of the mother connected to the uterus through placenta, gets delivered through the reproductive tract. All these events are under the control of what we call it as different set of hormones. And we are saying that during this period of 9 months, the baby grows to up to 3 kgs in weight. Some may 1.5, 2 kgs, 2.3 kgs, 2.5 kgs, whatever it may be. It grows in weight. In order to withstand the weight, the uterus also adds some layers so that the implantation of the fetus or embryo into the wall of the uterus can take place, and the uterus can hold the developing baby. So in order to hold the developing baby, the uterine wall increases in size, increases in thickness, sorry. And this increase in thickness takes place in different steps. One before fertilization, one after the fertilization. Why? Because here, if the wall is not ready by the time fertilization takes place, the formation of embryo and implantation is very quick. So by the time the embryo is formed, here this wall should be strong enough. This wall should be strong enough. So as the process of oogenesis is taking place here, the process of thickening of uterine walls also continues. So oogenesis, the process of oogenesis, and the process of thickening of uterine wall are simultaneous. It takes place before fertilization event. And during this period, the wall increases from 1 mm thickness to 3 mm thickness. If fertilization takes place, this is followed by development of embryo, followed by implantation. So after implantation takes place, where into the uterine wall, the embryo, when it comes in contact with this, goes inside the uterine wall. Here, in order to hold the baby, which is growing in weight and size, further thickening of the uterine wall continues up to about 8 mm thickness. So it further grows in thickness in order to hold the baby. Okay. And after 9 months, the entire process is completed. The completely developed baby squeezes through the wall of the uterus and gets delivered. This is what is going to happen. If by chance, what happens? Oogenesis has taken place, ovum is released, ovum reaches the fallopian tube, and 1 to 3 mm thickness of uterine wall is also completed. If at that time, if at all copulation did not take place, and there is no release of sperm, what happens? There is no fertilization at all. In the fallopian tube, fertilization will not take place. If fertilization will not take place, there is no necessity for the ovum to be there. So the now ovum undergoes what we call degeneration, and it is completely removed from the, it's not there in the fallopian tube. When ovum is not there, when sperms are not released, your ovum is not there after 1 day. Why? Because it waited for 24 hours for the sperms to release, but at the time copulation did not take place and sperms are not released, and the ovum also gets degenerated. So there is no ovum, there is no fertilization. In the event of absence of fertilization, what we have seen is, as the process of oogenesis is happening, the wall of the uterus is also thickened up to 3 mm. That means there is extra 2 mm of thickness of uterus, which is a waste for the female. How this extra 2 mm thickness occurs? By the addition of tissues, by the supply of blood vessels. Tissues and blood vessels. Now what happens? The extra 2 mm in the absence of fertilization gets sloughed off. This entire thing gets sloughed off and it again comes back to normal 1 mm thickness. So the extra 2 mm thickness made up of tissues and blood gets completely sloughed off. That means it is completely degenerated and the tissues along with the blood is said to be sent out, and this is called as menstrua, and the process is called as menstruation. Process is called as menstruation. So thus menstrual process occurs only when fertilization does not take place. When fertilization takes place, there is no menstruation because 1 mm thickness is up to 3 mm it is reached as the process of oogenesis is taking place. And further 5 mm thickness up to 8 mm takes place after fertilization. If at that time the degeneration of uterine wall takes place, the baby may die. So, in order to make the baby live, the process of what we call thickening of uterus should continue. So, all these events are coordinated and they are said to be under the control of various hormones. So where these hormones are present, where these hormones are released, and how they occur, we are going to see now. So in order to understand this entire process, first we should understand the structure of ovary. So any doubts up to this point, ask me. Otherwise, we will go to the next part, that is the structure of ovary. Any doubts, you are invited up to this point. No doubts?
No doubts, sir.
Good. Then let's start with the ovary. So the ovary, as the name says, it is oval in shape. It shows a layer present outside, like the layer present in the wall of the seminiferous tubules, which is here called as germinal epithelium. So in both seminiferous tubules as well as ovaries, it is called as germinal epithelium only. So it completely surrounds it. Now I'm telling you here the common process of ovarian development. Okay. Now what happens is, like spermatogenesis, oogenesis also takes place in 3 steps. The first step is said to be proliferation phase. Second step is said to be growth phase. And third step is said to be maturation phase. Same phases are present as in the case of spermatogenesis. Here also oogenesis involves 3 phases: proliferation phase, growth phase, and maturation phase. So let me start with proliferation phase. So in proliferation phase, what happens? Mitosis takes place. So the number of cells which can produce egg, we call them as mother cells of ovum. They increase in number, and these are called as oogonia in general. But here what happens is, in case of human beings, a number of divisions take place, and all these divisions result in a group of cells attached to a group of cells attached to the germinal epithelium. And these cells are said to be placed randomly. They are grouped together, they are said to be formed into layers. They are just to be clumped together. Okay? And such a group of cells or cluster of cells is called as primordial follicle. Primordial follicle. And this primordial follicle again continues proliferation phase and increases the number of cells. So from this primordial follicle, there develops a primary follicle. And it goes on to form secondary follicle, tertiary follicle, quaternary follicle. During this entire course of development of the follicle, what actually happens is the cells are gradually organized into layers. The cells are gradually organized into layers. Okay? And these cells form into layers, and the quaternary follicle during its development develops a cavity inside. This cavity is called as antrum, which is filled with fluid called as liquor folliculi. Liquor folliculi that is secreted by the cells present in the wall. These cells are called as follicular epithelial cells. Follicular epithelial cells. And this entire process of primordial follicle growing into quaternary follicle and finally into Graafian follicle is called as maturation. So primordial follicle undergoes maturation to produce a Graafian follicle. Excuse me. The Graafian follicle is found to be having a number of layers around it. Okay, and inside which there is a cavity. Now what happens? Here in the Graafian follicle, the most important event, what is that? Oogenesis takes place. So now we have completed what we call it as proliferation phase. So after the proliferation phase, oogenesis to continue, we need to have a growth phase. Okay? So during growth phase, what happens is, out of these different cells, only one ovum develops into. Only one ovum develops. And comparatively, the growth phase of oogenesis is longer than the growth phase of spermatogenesis in general in any organism. Why? Because when sperm comes in contact with the ovum during fertilization, the contribution of the sperm is only its nucleus with 23 chromosomes, haploid chromosomes. After the delivery of the nucleus, the sperm is said to be separated from the ovum. Now the entire embryonic development with the 46 chromosomes inside takes place in the fertilized egg only. This fertilized egg we call it as zygote. So the sperm that is coming to the egg for the development of the zygote is not contributing any cytoplasmic contents. So whatever the cytoplasmic contents that are present in the egg are only responsible for the development of the zygote. So these cytoplasmic contents, we can call them as what we call yolk material. So this yolk material is present inside the egg. So by the time fertilization takes place, yolk should be there, so that after that there is no chance for the accumulation of food material. Only utilization of food material takes place in the zygote. That is the reason why in the growth phase of oogenesis, which is longer, there is development formation of yolk content inside the egg. Okay, thus egg is said to be comparatively large sized than the sperm. One more difference between spermatogenesis and oogenesis is that after the egg develops, after the egg grows, we can the first stage is said to be spermatogonium. Sorry, oogonium. This is the mother cell of the ovum. So after proliferation, it enters the growth phase. So this cell increases in size enormously. Okay, and this is now called as primary oocyte. Primary oocyte. And this is still having 46 chromosomes. This is diploid and this is also diploid. Now this enters the third phase, which we call it as maturation phase. Maturation phase is the phase where meiosis takes place. This is the reason why some scientists call meiosis as maturation division. The division taking place in the maturation phase is called as maturation division. Because it is meiosis is called as maturation division. And coming to another difference between spermatogenesis and oogenesis, we know that meiosis takes place in two phases. First division, second division. So meiosis 1 takes place in the primary oocyte, where the division of the nucleus karyokinesis is equal. Division of the cytoplasm, that is cytokinesis, is unequal. In case of spermatogenesis, if this is the primary spermatocyte, when it divides, two cells which are half the size of the parent cell, and both are having nuclei which are also same. But whereas in case of oogenesis, here the karyokinesis is equal. That means it produces two similar nuclei. But the cytokinesis is unequal. So what happens here is, as the cytokinesis is unequal, one nucleus is here, another nucleus is here, and only this part of the nucleus, so this part of the cytoplasm goes into this cell and this goes into the other cell. Thus when it divides into two cells, it forms another large sized cell and another small sized cell. So this is primary oocyte which undergoes meiosis 1 to produce two cells. Because of an equal karyokinesis, chromosomes are equally distributed between the two daughter cells. Because of unequal cytokinesis, one is large sized and the other is small sized. That is another difference with respect to spermatogenesis, where equal sized cells are produced because the cytoplasmic contents are equally distributed in the daughter cells. In the spermatogenesis, here unequally distributed. Why? Because if it is said to be equally distributed, whatever the yolk content that is said to be developed during growth phase will be equally shared. In the second division, again it is equally shared, and by the time the ovum or egg is formed, 1/4 of the yolk only will remain, which is not sufficient for the entire embryonic development. So to utilize maximum amount of yolk that is present, that is formed during growth phase, unequal cytokinesis takes place during first division as well as second division. And now we call this as secondary oocyte. So from primary oocyte, we develop secondary oocyte. and the small sized cell is called as first polar body. This is called as first polar body. Now what happens? It is followed by meiosis II in both the cells. So when polar body divides, it forms two small sized polar bodies. Okay? After meiosis II. The same meiosis II takes place in this cell also. When this divides, again the same process. Karyokinesis is equal and cytokinesis is unequal. So that another large sized cell with maximum amount of yolk and a small sized cell, which is the second polar body, is said to be released. And this we call it as ovum or unfertilized egg. So, ovum or unfertilized egg develops in Graafian follicle. Okay. And with respect to mammals, especially human beings, there is a small discrepancy here that may lead to certain disorders which we have already discussed during genetic disorders, mutations like Down syndrome, Patau syndrome, Edwards syndrome, Klinefelter syndrome, Turner syndrome, etc., where there is a phenomenon called as non-disjunction. Why non-disjunction takes place here? Here what happens is, in case of human beings, this is the oogonium, grows in size to form primary oocyte, which undergoes first meiotic division to produce secondary oocyte and first polar body, which undergoes second meiotic division to produce a ovum and a second polar body, and this also divides to form two polar bodies. Thus, three small sized cells, one large ovum is produced. So these three are not ova, only one ovum is said to be produced. So why only one ovum is produced? What is that makes it? Here there are so many spermatogonia in case of spermatogenesis. Each one undergoes spermatogenesis process and produces number of millions of sperms. Whereas here there are so many follicular epithelial cells. Out of this, only one develops into. So what makes only the development of only one ovum is the question here. That is again under the control of hormones. One more thing is that in case of human beings, okay, here generally what happens after the ovum is developed, it breaks the Graafian follicle and is released outside, which is called as the process of which is called as ovulation. So in all other organisms, what happens? Ovum is released after meiosis II. In case of human beings, what happens is there is a meiotic arrest. There is a meiotic arrest at two places. One during meiosis I in metaphase, after the second one in during meiosis II. In metaphase 1, what happens? I will deal with when we deal with the cell cycle part. And here we are concerned with meiotic arrest in second phase. So here in the metaphasic state itself, in the second meiotic division, okay, here the cell is said to be, the secondary oocyte is said to be formed, and during ovulation it is the secondary oocyte that is released but not the ovum in case of mammals, especially human beings. So meiosis is not completed. Meiosis is not completed in case of human beings. So what is released during ovulation? It is the secondary oocyte that is released. When after ovulation, if copulation takes place and sperms are released, sperms in contact comes in contact with this, and now when sperm comes in contact with the ovum, when it touches the ovum gets metabolically activated. We call this as activation of egg. So it gets metabolically activated. so that the nucleus divides and completes the process of meiosis 2, releasing the polar body, and there is a haploid nucleus now. After this, both the nuclei fuse to form a diploid nucleus or syncyrion, and now this becomes a ovum which gets already fertilized. So this is how this process takes place. Now the contention is that in case of human beings, the follicles, the number of follicles that are formed is said to be in large number. It is in large number. It's in millions during the embryonic development. By the time the baby is born, millions come down to lakhs. Millions come down to lakhs. And each Graafian follicle is having oocyte or oogenesis formed into the secondary oocyte stage. Secondary oocyte stage, where all the chromosomes are in metaphasic arrest, okay, with spindle fibers being attached. And these many follicles with metaphasic arrest in second meiotic division in the secondary oocyte stage are present in the what we call ovary. And as the age increases from birth, day 1 to puberty, day 1 to till 14 years, gradually the number of follicles that are present here, they gradually what we call degenerate. As the process of degeneration of follicles taking place, the process of development of ovum also takes place. As the oogenesis process starts here, as the development of one of the follicles takes place here, the ovum is said to be, out of all the follicles, only one ovum develops and it gets released. Ovulation takes place with respect to only one follicle, but not with respect to all the follicles. Though they are present in million numbers, they will not release. Only one ovum is said to be released, which is again under the control of hormones. Then what happens here? Out of all the lakhs of follicles, only one develops and one gets takes part in ovulation. The remaining gradually degenerating. So, which follicle? For example, let us say there are 1 lakh. There are 1 lakh follicles, and which follicle is going to release the ovum? Nobody knows. So it stayed for day 1 to 14 years, and there is one follicle, it's waiting for its turn. So every month one follicle is said to be, after 14 years is reached, it is ready for ovulation. So which follicle is ready? Nobody knows. Everything is waiting for its turn. So randomly maybe it's selected. And for 14 years, what happened? The spindle fibers are attached to the, for 14 years, the spindle fibers are attached to the, so these many are coming again. The spindle fibers are attached to the chromosomes. So what happens? There is every chance for the spindle fibers to get weakened. There is every chance for the spindle fibers to get weakened. So here these are attached to the spindle fibers. How many days? Not just days. From day 1 to 14 years. Even before the birth also. And if the marriageable age is reached 18, okay, and one of the follicles shows ovulation and ovum is released. Okay, and now in what we call the marriageable age, even though the marriageable age is reached, one waits for a job, let us say so. Up to 25 years, there is no problem. If the number of years increases 30, there might not be any problem. But after 30, 35, 40, if the individual waits for marriage, the female, what happens? The number of years in the first meiotic arrest, there is first meiotic arrest and second meiotic arrest. First meiotic arrest, it is in metaphase, where the spindle fibers are still attached and the duration is said to be around 40 years. Now what happens? In every monthly cycle, only one follicle is said to be completing the metaphasic arrest, so that from primary oocyte, secondary oocyte is formed and it is released. And if the period of marriage increases, there is every chance for one of these spindle fibers to get weakened. They become weak. If that happens, one of this is said to be, this spindle fiber is lost. This spindle fiber is said to be lost. If this spindle fiber is lost, what happens now? Both these chromosomes come to one pole. With respect to others, these two, here they are equally distributed. This goes to one pole and this goes to the other pole. So all the other chromosomes are equally distributed. There are 23 pairs, isn't it? So 22 reach one and 22 reach the other gamete. So here this is ovum, secondary oocyte or ovum, and this is the polar body, let us say so. But what happens now? These two are reaching one gamete and this is not having any representation of this pair of chromosomes. Why? Because this spindle fiber got weakened. So now here one is having 24 chromosomes, the other is having 23. So when the individual with 24 chromosomes in its ovum, this ovum, when it gets fertilized with the normal zygote, normal sperm with 23 chromosome, it results in fertilization where there are 47 chromosomes. If this happens in 21st chromosome, which actually one from the father, one from the mother, but here there are two from the mother and one from the father, resulting in 47 chromosomes, which leads to Down syndrome. The same is the case with Klinefelter. The same is the case with what we call Patau syndrome and Edwards syndrome. So what happens here is there is a failure of separation of these two chromosomes. This failure of separation of these two chromosomes is called as non-disjunction, which leads to a particular syndrome. Okay, so this is how the entire process is said to be highly complicated. So there is, again I am drawing this again, please bear with me. So there is a ovary with germinal epithelium, and this germinal epithelium produces a number of follicles, and these follicles undergo maturation. They form into a Graafian follicle with a large number of cells formed into layers, and this is called as a mature follicle, called as the Graafian follicle. And in this Graafian follicle, one of the follicular epithelial cell develops into ovum. But what I have said, in the meiosis 1, in the metaphase, it gets arrested. Okay, so this continues till 14 years and further if the female is not getting married. And every monthly cycle, what happens? This completes the metaphasic arrest, gets activated, completes the meiosis 1, and in the secondary oocyte stage it gets released. In secondary oocyte stage it gets released. So the one that reaches the fallopian tube is not the ovum in case of human beings, but the secondary oocyte that reaches there. And during this process of release of ovum, which is called as ovulation, this process is also under the control of hormones. So development of ovum is under the control of hormones. Maturation of Graafian follicle, primordial follicle to Graafian follicle is under the control of hormones, and the process of ovulation is also under the control of hormones. After the ovulation, what happens during ovulation? During ovulation, here the ovum has to come out of the Graafian follicle. So during this process, it breaks the Graafian follicle at places. It breaks the Graafian follicle at places, and so that the ovum is released. So as the Graafian follicle breaks, there is a breakage of blood capillaries, and there is every chance for the blood to clot there. If the blood clotting like thing happens, yellow colored fluid called as serum gets released, and that serum is said to be yellow colored, let us say so. It fills the entire Graafian follicle now. Now what happened? The Graafian follicle is now converted into a corpus luteum. It is converted into corpus luteum. So we can see a primordial follicle and a number of Graafian follicles. If the Graafian follicles undergo ovulation, after ovulation, one of these gets developed into corpus luteum. And the corpus luteum stays for some time. It stays for some time until fertilization takes place. If fertilization does not take place, that means ovum reaches the fallopian tube, but copulation does not happen and sperms are not released, and ovum degenerates. When the ovum degenerates, there is no fertilization, and the corpus luteum completely degenerates, and it produces a scar-like structure called as corpus albicans. If fertilization takes place, ovulation followed by copulation and fertilization, corpus luteum stays till the 3rd month of pregnancy. It stays till the 3rd month of pregnancy, after which it gets atrophied. But by the time, there is no use for corpus luteum after the 3rd month. Why? Because here develops a placenta which takes up the functions that are left by the corpus luteum. So thus, the primordial follicle, Graafian follicle, corpus luteum and placenta, they are secreting a number of hormones, and they are responsible for controlling the reproduction in female. Okay, is it any doubt for you? You please ask me. Otherwise, I will continue to the next step. Any doubt?
Also,
Okay, good. So now we'll move to the next step, that is hormonal control of reproduction in females. So the first hormone is excuse me. The first hormone is gonadotropin releasing hormone. The first one is a gonadotropin releasing hormone. From where it is secreted? It is secreted by the hypothalamus. Okay. So what is hypothalamus? We have already seen it in the morning class. Hypothalamus is the floor of diencephalon of forebrain. This produces certain hormones, and these hormones are called as releasing hormones. The target organ of these releasing hormones are the cells of the pituitary gland. So here, the hypothalamus releases gonadotropin releasing hormones. So these gonadotropin releasing hormones, they reach the pituitary gland and stimulate it. Which part of the pituitary gland is stimulated? It has two parts, as I said before, adenohypophysis or anterior pituitary, neurohypophysis or posterior pituitary. Adenohypophysis is again divided into three parts: pars distalis, pars tuberalis, pars intermedia, and these stimulate the cells located in the pars distalis. What kind of cells? These cells are called as gonadotrophs. These are called as gonadotrophs, and these gonadotrophs are of two types. One is called as folliculotroph, and the other is called as luteotroph. So thus, gonadotrophin releasing hormones are also two types. One which stimulates the folliculotroph, and the other which stimulates the luteotroph. Okay, and this is called as follicle stimulating hormone releasing hormone, and this is called as luteinizing hormone releasing hormone. Thus, with respect to gonadotrophin releasing hormones, there are two types. So, hypothalamus releases two hormones. One is called as, both are called as gonadotropin releasing hormones, of which one is called as follicle stimulating hormone releasing hormone. It stimulates folliculotrophs of pituitary gland, so that pituitary gland starts secreting follicle stimulating hormone. Likewise, the second hormone is luteinizing hormone releasing hormone. It is also another gonadotropin releasing hormone. This stimulates luteotrophic cells, luteotrophs, so that luteinizing hormone is said to be secreted. Thus, hypothalamus secretes two kinds of gonadotropin releasing hormones which stimulate the cells of the pituitary to produce two different hormones. So these are the first two hormones that are said to be involved in regulating the reproduction of females. Now let us start with follicle stimulating hormone. So the second hormone is said to be follicle stimulating hormone. So this follicle stimulating hormone, that is second hormone, is said to be secreted by the folliculotrophic cells of pars distalis of anterior pituitary. It is secreted by the folliculotrophs of pars distalis of anterior pituitary, and its main function is maturation of primordial follicle to Graafian follicle. This is its first function. Maturation of primordial follicle into Graafian follicle, where primordial follicle is said to be with groups of cells, and in Graafian follicle all these are organized into what we call it as follicular epithelial cells arranged in layers. That is the first function of follicle stimulating hormone. The second function, now what happened here? We have seen a Graafian follicle. So inside the Graafian follicle, what develops? There is development of ovum. So the second function of follicle stimulating hormone is oogenesis. It is called as oogenesis. So here what happens now? Gradually ovum develops. Both these are said to be under the control of follicle stimulating hormone. Thus ovum is said to be developed. When you see the male reproductive system, the follicle stimulating hormone is responsible for spermatogenesis, producing sperms. In females it is responsible for the formation of ova. Both are called as gametes. So the main function of the follicle stimulating hormone is the formation of gametes. Hence, follicle stimulating hormone is called as gametokinetic factor. It is called as gametokinetic factor. Why? Because it is responsible for the formation of gametes. Follicle stimulating hormone is called as gametokinetic factor. So these are the two functions attributed to follicle stimulating hormone. So now the third function is that what happened here? Primordial follicle developed into Graafian follicle. So in the Graafian follicle, we just have seen that there are a number of layers of cells, and these are called as follicular epithelial cells. And now these follicular epithelial cells start secreting a hormone called as estrogen. So the third function of what is follicle stimulating hormone is, just a minute, whatever. So the third function of follicle stimulating hormone is stimulating the follicular epithelial cells of Graafian follicle so that it starts secreting estrogen. It starts secreting estrogen. So this coming to the estrogen now. So let us start with the functions of the third hormone, estrogen. Estrogen is called as the female sex hormone. Like testosterone in males, it is called as female sex hormones. And the main function of this, as the testes are said to be developed and axillary reproductive organs are developed under the influence of testosterone, estrogen is also responsible for the development of female reproductive system, completely reproductive organs, and the development of accessory reproductive organs. Third, the development of secondary sexual characters like hair
వాయిస్ వినిపించడం లేదు సార్.
వాయిస్ వినిపించట్లేదా? Just a minute. So am I clear now?
Yes, sir.
Hello? Okay, good. So now what happens? The development of secondary sexual characters. Why we are calling them as secondary sexual characters? The development of reproductive organs and axillary reproductive organs are called as primary sexual characters, based on which we can say whether it is male or female. Secondary sexual characters are, that is, the development of breasts and certain other hair pattern in different parts of the body is said to be called as a secondary sexual characters in addition to the tone. So all these are said to be under the control of estrogen. And this estrogen is also responsible for release of certain fluids into among the tissues. That is the reason why female are said to be somewhat prone to, when the hormone levels are more, they are said to be prone to what we call fluffy nature with respect to the skin and other tissues because of the release of fluid under the influence of estrogen. So the basic thing is that estrogen is responsible for the development of primary and secondary sexual characters. And the most important function is, as I have said you before, as the development of oogenesis, development of ovum during oogenesis is taking place, and in the uterus also there is the thickening process from 1 to 3 mm continues. So initially the uterine wall is 1 mm, now it increased to 3 mm. And the function, the fourth important function of estrogen is thickening of thickening of uterine wall. And this thickening is said to be the first one. We call it as initial thickening of uterine wall. So initial thickening of uterine wall is under the control of estrogen, so that it reaches from 1 to 3 mm in thickness. So these are the various functions attributed to estrogen. In addition to this, testosterone, as we have seen, it has a myotrophic effect, so that musculature is said to be strong in males. In the absence of testosterone and in the presence of estrogen, the musculature is said to be somewhat smooth when compared with the male in female. Now what happens is, as this is the Graafian follicle, this Graafian follicle is formed under the influence of follicle stimulating hormone from primordial follicle. Now this is secreting estrogen. Graafian follicle is now secreting estrogen. As estrogen is secreted, it shows a negative feedback effect on the hypothalamus, which stops producing follicle stimulating hormone releasing hormone. When the follicle stimulating hormone is releasing hormone is stopped, it stops stimulating the folliculotrophic cells of pituitary. Then what happens? The release of follicle stimulating hormone is said to be stopped. So the release of estrogen is having a negative feedback effect on the hypothalamus followed by pituitary gland, so that follicular stimulating hormone decreases. So let us say there is follicle stimulating hormone. Initially it is 0. Now it has increased to this much. Okay, and now what happened? This resulted in the formation of a Graafian follicle. Now this Graafian follicle starts secreting estrogen. So estrogen levels gradually increased. As the estrogen levels are gradually increasing, the follicle stimulating hormones levels are gradually decreasing. They are gradually decreasing. As the follicle stimulating hormone levels are gradually decreasing, for example, they come to a point up to this, the gradual decrease in the follicle stimulating hormone has taken place. That means still this much level of follicle stimulating hormone is still there in the blood. Okay, now when the follicle stimulating hormone stimulation is stopped, now the second gonadotropin releasing hormone, what is that? Luteotrophic hormone releasing hormone. The decrease in the levels of follicle stimulating hormone stimulates the hypothalamus to release luteinizing hormone releasing hormone. So this luteinizing hormone releasing hormone stimulates the luteotrophic cells of pituitary, so that luteinizing hormone increases. So now this is follicle stimulating hormone, this is estrogen. Now we are coming with luteinizing hormone. So the levels of this hormone are gradually increasing. So there is a point where the follicle stimulating hormone is gradually decreasing under the influence of negative feedback effect of the increased estrogen levels, and the luteinizing hormone is said to be gradually increasing. So there is a point where the follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone both are present in the blood circulation, and this is what is responsible for. So this is the ovary, this is the Graafian follicle, where oogenesis is completed under the influence of follicle stimulating hormone. Now there is decrease in the follicle stimulating hormone and there is an increase in the luteinizing hormone, where both are said to be present at a place. The levels of both are said to be almost equal. At that time ovulation takes place. So scientists say that it is follicle stimulating hormone responsible for ovulation, but actually the scientific research states that ovulation is under the control of follicle stimulating hormone as well as luteinizing hormone. So now what happens? The ovum is said to be in the secondary oocyte stage is released, a process called as ovulation. If the female monthly cycle is 28 days in human beings, ovulation takes place on 14th day. Ovulation takes place on 14th day. So let's come back again to the same place. So there is ovary, there is fallopian tube, okay, and there is uterus, cervix and vagina. And here what happens? Ovum is released. Ovulation has taken place. This ovum comes to occupy a position by the movement of these cilia-like structures into the fallopian tube. By this time what happened? Estrogen is responsible for the initial thickening of the uterine wall. At the same time, inside the ovary what has happened? The Graafian follicle is broken. Okay, so the ovum is released. Now what I have said before, the Graafian follicle now is converted into corpus luteum. So who does this? This is the fourth hormone, luteinizing hormone. So the main function of luteinizing hormone is along with follicle stimulating hormone, this is responsible for ovulation. This is the first function. The second function is Graafian follicle after ovulation is converted into corpus luteum under the influence of luteinizing hormone. So this effect is called as luteinization effect. Hence this hormone is called as luteinizing hormone. So Graafian follicle is now converted into corpus luteum. Now what happens? This corpus luteum now starts secreting, Graafian follicle is not there now. When Graafian follicle is not there, there is what we call secretion of estrogen is stopped. Secretion of estrogen is stopped. Why? Estrogen is secreted by the follicular epithelial cells of the Graafian follicle. Now the Graafian follicle is converted into corpus luteum. There is no estrogen here. When the estrogen is not there, the uterine wall, which is said to be 1 to 3 mm in thickness, it may get sloughed off. It may degenerate. In order to stop the sloughing off of the uterine wall, now the cells of corpus luteum start secreting the fifth hormone, that is progesterone. Now what happens? Progesterone is said to be secreted by the corpus luteum. All these are under the control of luteinizing hormone. So the first function is, along with follicle stimulating hormone, is responsible for ovulation, and it is responsible for the conversion of Graafian follicle to corpus luteum. As Graafian follicle is absent, estrogen levels are dropped. When the estrogen levels are dropped, the corpus luteum starts continuously secreting progesterone. And let us start with progesterone. So progesterone, where it is secreted? It is secreted by the cells of corpus luteum. And what is it is responsible for? We have seen that uterine wall reached up to 1 to 3 mm thickness. So it has to be continued until fertilization takes place, isn't it? So the further thickening, initial thickening is under the control of estrogen. The further thickening from 1 to 3 already happened. 3 to 8 is under the control of progesterone. So further thickening of uterine wall is said to be under the control of progesterone hormone released by the cells of corpus luteum. I have told you already that what happens if fertilization takes place, corpus luteum in the ovary, corpus luteum stays for 3 more months. If fertilization will not take place, it degenerates to form a scar-like structure called as corpus albicans. When it degenerates in the absence of fertilization, there is no corpus luteum. When there is no corpus luteum, there is no progesterone. When there is no progesterone, further thickening is said to be stopped. In addition to further thickening, even the initial thickened tissues are also completely degenerated, and it results in what we call it as menstruation, which takes place in the last 5 days of menstrual cycle, starting from 23rd to 28th, let us say so. And in the absence of progesterone, why progesterone is absent? Corpus luteum is said to be degenerated. When corpus luteum is not there, is no progesterone. When there is no progesterone, there is no stimulus for the thickening of uterine wall, and whatever the excess tissues and blood vessels that are accumulated, that are said to be completely broken down, and it results in a menstrual fluid that is secreted outside. This is what menstruation is. What happens if the fertilization takes place? The corpus luteum will not degenerate. The corpus luteum will not degenerate. It stays for some more time. That means it continuously producing progesterone. Let us say initial 3 months of pregnancy it stays. Then what happens? The progesterone continues, and the wall of the uterus from 3 mm to gradually 6 mm or 5 mm, it is gradually increasing in thickness. Now after 3 months, the corpus luteum degenerates. Now the further maintenance of the uterine wall for the remaining 6 months period has to be taken up. So by this time, what happened? Between the developing baby and the uterine wall, a placental connection is established. Now this placental connection starts secreting another hormone that is called again as progesterone. So now we are coming with another hormone, 6th hormone, and this is again progesterone. What is the difference between these two? The first progesterone is secreted by corpus luteum. This is secreted by placenta, and this is responsible for maintaining thickness of uterine wall throughout the remaining gestation period. So the uterine wall, which is almost 8 mm thickness, is continued in the same manner till the delivery of the baby, and the development of the baby is not aborted here. Why? Because the wall is said to be strong. Some scientists say that when the progesterone levels secreted by the placenta are not optimum, then gradually the thickness decreases and the development of the baby is stopped, which we call it as the development is aborted. Abort means stopped, and this process we call it as abortion. So abortions may take place in the absence of progesterone hormone. So thus progesterone is responsible for the remaining period of the development of the baby. So now we have seen completely developed baby after 9 months. Now the 7th hormone comes in play. So this is the uterus. The uterus has a wall. This wall has 3 layers. The outer layer is called as epimetrium. The inner layer is called as endometrium, and middle layer is called as mesometrium, and this is also called as myometrium. Why we call this as myometrium? Because this middle layer is made up of a number of smooth muscles. Smooth muscles, we know they are involuntary. So these involuntary muscles are present in the wall of the uterus. Now the endometrium takes part in the formation of placental connection with the developing fetus. So there is this green is said to be placental connection, let us say so. Now what happens is, after 9 months, there is complete development of the baby which has to be delivered. Now, under the influence of, some say it is the ovary, some say it is the placenta. Whatever it may be, either ovary or placenta secretes another hormone called as oxytocin. So this oxytocin has two main functions. The first function is stimulation of smooth muscles of mesometrium of uterus, so that continuous contractions of this wall takes place, and the baby which is implanted into the wall of the uterus along with the placenta is expelled into the uterine cavity. So the baby is expelled into the uterine cavity, but it is still connected with the uterine wall with the placental connection. So oxytocin's main function is expulsion of fetus from the uterine wall into the uterine cavity. It is its main function. So after this, there is another function, but which comes in the latter part. That function I am going to reserve it for the next thing. So after the baby comes into the uterine cavity, now it has to be delivered, through which the cervix and the female genital opening, through the vagina, it has to be delivered. But here, in case of female or male, the waist region is said to be guarded by pelvic girdle. Waist region is guarded by bones called as pelvic girdle. So these bones, we know bones are said to be connected by ligaments. So these bones are connected by ligaments. But the birth canal is said to be very less in width. The baby is said to be somewhat large sized. The birth canal is said to be very less in width. So now they releases another hormone that is called as relaxin. So this relaxin is secreted by the ovary, and this relaxin is said to be responsible for loosening the ligaments of bones of pelvic girdle. So that what happens now is the birth canal which is narrow till now is said to be widened, so that the delivery of the baby takes place. So when the loosening of the ligaments of pelvic girdle takes place, the relaxin is responsible for broadening the birth canal and delivery of the baby. So with this, the delivery of the baby also has been completed. After the delivery of the baby has to be nourished. So for the nourishment, first there must be formation of milk in the mammary glands of the mother, the process of which is called as lactopoiesis. So coming to lactopoiesis, here there comes, what is the number of hormone here? 8th or 9th, I forgot. So here there is a 9th. So there is a hormone released by hypothalamus now. So this hormone that is released by hypothalamus is again a releasing hormone. This is called as prolactin releasing hormone. So this prolactin releasing hormone stimulates what cells? It stimulates the lactotrophic cells of anterior pituitary again. lactotrophic cells of anterior pituitary. So that the lactotrophic cells now start secreting lactotrophic hormone, like follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. Pituitary gland also secretes lactotrophic hormone, which is also called as prolactin. That is the reason why we can call it as prolactin releasing hormone or lactotrophic hormone releasing hormone, whatever it may be. So now the prolactin is said to be released. And this lactotrophic hormone is now responsible for lactopoiesis. And this is only initial formation of milk only. Initial formation of milk takes place by under the influence of prolactin. But after the delivery of the baby, the milk that is present in the mammary glands is under the control of the synthesis of milk is under the control of prolactin. That means only initial synthesis of milk is under the control of prolactin. Then what if after the delivery of the baby, so what happens up to 1 year, 6 months or 2 years, the female has to feed the baby. And now there comes to play the next hormone, that is thyroxine and also growth hormone. So these, according to research, are responsible for what we call continuation of lactopoiesis. That means further processing or formation of milk is under the control of these hormones. Okay, so why there is what we call before pregnancy and after pregnancy. Before pregnancy, mammary glands present. After pregnancy, mammary glands are present. And here also milk is present, and here also milk is present. But this milk is not secreted, but this is secreted. Why? Because the prolactin hormone that is released is said to be inhibitory in nature before pregnancy. Okay. After pregnancy, what happens is now the 11th hormone, that is nothing but oxytocin. So the prolactin hormone, which is inhibitory, has to be stopped, and the inhibitory action is said to be stopped, so that what happens? Prolactin is secreted. So this prolactin secretion is requiring a stimulus for the stopping of the inhibitory effect. What is that stimulus? It is the suckling impulse of the baby. So as the baby starts sucking the milk, what happens? This suckling impulse decreases the inhibitory action, so that milk can be secreted. But for milk secretion, the milk that is present in the mammary glands has to come out. The mammary glands are also, like uterine wall, are made up of smooth muscles. So under the influence of oxytocin, the smooth muscles of mammary glands are stimulated and milk is secreted out. Hence, oxytocin is called as milk ejection hormone. So, thus there is a bond being developed between the baby and the mother. Hence, some normal people, not scientists, call this hormone as a love hormone, because there is a bond developed between the baby and the mother due to the secretion of milk. But actually, we call this as milk ejection hormone. So, the second function that is attributed to oxytocin is, first function is expulsion of the fetus by the contraction of smooth muscles of uterus, and second function is expulsion of milk, ejection of milk from the mammary glands. Thus, different types of hormones are responsible for control of reproduction in female. So this is all about this class. Any doubts you can ask me, otherwise we'll close.